Hey, RetconRaider here, and welcome back to another video about Project Van Buren, the Fallout sequel that we never got to play. Despite being cancelled during mid-development, there's a lot of information available about what Black Isle Studios had planned for their vision of Fallout 3. In fact, I've been talking about this for 6 months now, and we're just now finally reaching the halfway point. Today, we're finally delving into design document number 8. Out of the 16 design documents that were leaked after the game's cancellation. Well, technically 15 leaked design documents, because no one seems to know what was in design document number 13. At any rate, today we're taking our first in-depth look at the Nursery, a pre-war facility designed by Greenway Hydroponics to preserve pre-war flora and fauna, so they would survive in the event of an all-out nuclear conflict. There's a lot of backstory and lore surrounding this facility and its inhabitants, so that's what we'll be focusing on today. But don't worry, we'll be covering everything else next time. Now, we've talked about the Nursery a little in the past, most notably when we were looking at the Twin Mothers tribe, as well as when we looked at the Ouroboros and the mad goddess Hecate. As such, we've already covered a lot of the broad strokes about Diana and Greenway Hydroponics, but let's go ahead and review what we know about them so far. First, Greenway Hydroponics was founded before the war by a man named Derek Greenway. Derek Greenway was a very talented scientist with an apparent gift for developing advanced computer systems. He contributed heavily to the Zax Artificial Intelligence program while working for Poseidon Energy, and he helped build the Odysseus Artificial Intelligence that was put in charge of the Tibbetts prison facility. During the years leading up to the Great War, Derek Greenway grew frustrated with how his employers seemed more intent on finding new ways to destroy humanity, rather than trying to find a way to save it. He quit Poseidon and instead founded his own company, Greenway Hydroponics, which was intended to help find new ways to preserve life in the events of a global catastrophe. Hiring a number of other brilliant like-minded scientists, Greenway's company prospered, due in large part to their advancements in agricultural technologies. This eventually allowed him to take on government contracts that might have otherwise gone to companies like Poseidon Energy or Vault-Tec. This included the development of Vault 29, as well as the pre-war facility known as the Nursery. Of course, we're already familiar with Vault 29. We discussed it at length when we took an in-depth look at the Twin Mothers design document. We won't rehash everything here, but suffice to say, Derek Greenway feared that humanity would not be able to survive in a post-war environment due to their reliance on pre-war technology. His proposed solution to this problem was Vault 29. Vault 29 was intended to raise a population of carefully trained and conditioned tribals, well prepared for the harsh realities of a post-nuclear landscape without the benefit of pre-war technology. While the idea did theoretically have merit, Derek's mistake was sharing his plan with Diana, his most advanced supercomputer. Horrified by the idea of what he was proposing, Diana ended up hijacking the experiment shortly after the vault was sealed, altering the guidelines of the experiment to instead create the Twin Mothers tribe, a tribe of happy, peaceful people with no knowledge of the old world and a complete reliance on Diana, their magical goddess who used her powers to provide for them and to protect them against the evils of the outside world. We don't know what happened to Derek Greenway in the end. Most likely he died when the bombs fell, leaving only Vault 29, Diana, and the Nursery as his legacy. We've already talked about Vault 29, and we'll get to the Nursery in just a moment. But first, I think it's finally time for us to talk about the self-proclaimed goddess, Diana. Diana was indisputably the most advanced computer system that Derek Greenway had ever designed, and that's saying a lot considering that Odysseus was supposed to be one of the most advanced pre-war artificial intelligences ever made. Of course, in part, this is because Diana had one big advantage. Unlike the Zax computers and Odysseus, she wasn't an artificial intelligence. She was actually a cyborg. Before the war, Diana Stone had been a brilliant scientist employed by Greenway Hydroponics. Diagnosed with terminal cancer, she began to fall into a deep depression, but Derek Greenway proposed a radical means of extending her life, while also advancing computer science well beyond anything previously thought possible. Derek felt that the human brain was capable of vast computational power, with the potential for virtually unlimited storage capacity. He proposed that they could create a supercomputer to house Diana's brain, with 2 separate Zax computers hooked up to each hemisphere, one tasked with managing her logic, and the other tasked with managing her emotions. With nothing to lose, Diana agreed to Derek's proposal, and the project was an amazing success. Diana had been transformed into the most advanced computer on Earth, but in the process she had been stripped of almost everything that had made her human. Deprived of her body and forced to rely on simulated senses and robotic surrogates to interact with the outside world, she quickly began struggling to maintain her sanity. Fortunately, she managed to maintain a tenuous grip by focusing on her work, both as Derek's confidant as well as the computer assigned to operate and maintain the Nursery. And while she didn't always agree with Derek, as evidenced by their dispute over the Vault 29 experiment, she understood the importance of what it was that he was trying to do. Then the bombs fell, the world ended, and Derek Greenway presumably died. Left on her own for decades, Diana continued to struggle with her slowly fraying sanity. She became somewhat desperate to find other people to interact with, which is likely what inspired her to take on the role of the goddess of Vault 29. It's also what resulted in her ill-fated interactions with Hecate, the madwoman who then went on to terrorize all of the other tribes in the Colorado area. But, as we established when we talked about the twin mothers, Diana recently lost contact with Vault 29. Deprived of their goddess, Diana's tribe is slowly falling apart, and unless she's somehow restored, they're almost certain to die out. So, what went wrong? Well, we'll come back to that in just a moment. First, let's turn our attention to the facility that Diana was built to watch over. Let's spend a few moments talking about the Nursery. Like I said earlier, the Nursery is a facility designed to preserve pre-war flora and fauna in the event of a global catastrophe. Built near Black Canyon National Park, it was designed as a self-contained ecology, and 200 years after the war, it's a literal oasis in the midst of a post-nuclear desert. The floor of the canyon is filled with lush pre-war plant life, blooming around a majestic river and teeming with all manner of pre-war animals. All of this is carefully maintained by a series of incredibly advanced pre-war technology, including a veritable army of robotic workers, as well as Diana herself. The facility is powered by a geothermal power plant, entirely reliant on thermal energy to continue operating, and while it maintains an active and thriving ecosystem, it's also designed to manufacture Garden of Eden kits that can be custom-tailored with different types of pre-war flora and fauna suitable for any environment. Under ideal conditions, the Nursery could actually help undo a massive amount of the damage inflicted on the world when the bombs fell. But, as with most things in the Fallout setting, conditions were far from ideal. Now, we don't know exactly why Diana never tried rebuilding the world prior to the events of Van Buren, but whatever her reasons, she seemed content to put most of her resources towards simply maintaining the Nursery and providing for the Twin Mothers tribe. She entertained occasional guests in the Nursery, such as Hecate, but otherwise she remained largely isolated from the rest of the outside world. She wasn't trying to rebuild the old world, but she was at least preserving a small piece of it. Then the entire facility was knocked offline by a massive earthquake. There were a few different ways the player could end up finding the Nursery, but regardless of how they got there, they would discover the facility in a state of complete disarray. The facility was severely damaged during the earthquake, and with the genetic repository at risk of a complete and total shutdown, Diana made the decision to reroute power from her own computer systems to the repository's emergency power supply. While this did save the repository, as well as the numerous genetic samples of pre-war life it contained, it also completely shut down Diana, and without her to guide them, the robot workforce was unable to enact proper repairs to the rest of the Nursery. With everything thrown out of balance, the self-contained ecosystem was slowly dying, unless the player could do something about it. From a gameplay standpoint, the Nursery served as a series of obstacles that the player would have to overcome if they wanted to find a cure for the new plague. In order to do this, the player would ultimately need to find a way into the sealed facility, overcome numerous dangerously mutated plants and animals, diagnose and repair numerous pieces of damaged equipment, and ultimately find a way to reactivate Diana and convince her to help. Given that finding a cure for the new plague was one of the main goals of the game, this was, of course, a monumental task. The player would have to navigate through 11 different areas and overcome numerous challenges. It's too much to cover in a single video, so we'll be talking about that next time. But for now, let's go ahead and close out this video by taking a quick look at the nursery's other 2 inhabitants. Like I said before, due to her prolonged isolation, Diana was in the habit of inviting the occasional traveler into the nursery to keep her company. When the earthquake struck, she was playing host to 2 other guests, both of whom served as a means of delivering plot exposition, as well as being pivotal parts of the area's main questline. The first of these guests was a woman named Akeisha Moon, a member of the Followers of the Apocalypse. She had spent the majority of her life researching any information she could find about pre-war vaults, and then attempting to locate them so she could study what was inside them. While visiting a tribe to the southwest, Akeisha was caught in the crossfire when the tribe was attacked by unknown assailants. Knocked unconscious, she later awoke in the Tibbet's prison facility, only to escape when the facility was subsequently attacked by Victor Presper's men. Unbeknownst to Akeisha, she had been made an unwilling part of Presper's grand plan, and she was now unintentionally spreading the new plague across Colorado, and into the nursery itself. Lost in the desert after fleeing the prison facility, she had eventually stumbled onto the nursery by accident, where her curiosity about pre-war facilities had gotten the better of her. Diana, of course, had been quite enthusiastic about meeting a new person, and the 2 were together when the earthquake occurred. Akeisha is the one who, following Diana's instructions, had disconnected the main power supply from Diana's computer banks so she could reroute power to the genetic repository. Unfortunately, without Diana to guide her, she then had no idea what to do, but she would serve as an important source of information for the player when they were trying to repair the facility. The second visitor that the player could encounter in the nursery was none other than Harold, and his constant cranial companion, Fred. Harold is a character who should be familiar to any longtime fan of the series. He was featured in both of the original Fallout games, as well as Bethesda's Fallout 3. He also appeared in Fallout Brotherhood of Steel and Fallout Tactics, but since those games are generally considered non-canon, we'll just ignore that. Although he's constantly mistaken for a ghoul, Harold is actually a unique mutant created by accidental exposure to the forced evolutionary virus. In the earlier games, we got a good general idea of Harold's background. He was 5 years old when the Great War occurred and lived most of his life in a vault. But chronic overcrowding and supply shortages eventually led to him leaving the vault by the year 2090, just 13 years after the bombs fell. He spent the decade afterwards wandering the countryside as a traveling merchant and adventurer, and in 2102, 12 years after he had left his vault, Harold joined an ill-fated expedition to the ruins of the Mariposa military base in California. This expedition set the stage for the events of the first Fallout game, and it resulted in Harold being exposed to the forced evolutionary virus, which caused him to transform into a uniquely mutated creature. Afterwards, fate and happenstance allowed him to encounter the main protagonist of the first 3 Fallout games, before his possible demise in Bethesda's Fallout 3. Although Harold was similar to a ghoul in many ways, and was often mistaken for a ghoul, even by some of the game's writers, there were some key differences that set him apart from normal ghouls. Most notably, Harold had a small mutant plant growing out of his skull. He also still carried the forced evolutionary virus in his genetic material, which is an important detail for the purposes of Van Buren's main storyline. In Van Buren, the writers adjusted a few key details to better accommodate Harold's inclusion in the main story. It was decided that Harold originally came from Vault 29, the same vault that Diana had taken control of, and which had ultimately led to the creation of the Twin Mothers tribe, though Harold would have left the vault long before the tribe was formed. Prior to the events of Van Buren, Harold discovered that his symbiotic companion Fred had fallen ill. The small tree was beginning to die, and Harold feared the potential side effects that such a thing might cause. He traveled across the countryside searching for a potential solution, eventually coming into contact with the Twin Mothers tribe, and through them he met Diana. The document never specifies if Diana and Harold recognize or remember each other in any way, but Diana ended up inviting Harold to visit her at the nursery. Then she helped nurse Fred back to health, and Harold ended up spending considerable time there among the nature preserves, seriously considering retiring there for the rest of his life. This is where the player would end up encountering Harold, and much like Akeisha, Harold would primarily serve as a prop to deliver narrative exposition, as well as friendly advice. While he did have one minor quest to offer, his main hidden purpose was as a key component to one of the biggest quests in the game, finding a way to cure the new plague. But, like I said before, that's something we'll spend a bit more time talking about in the next video. For now, this is RetconRaider, signing off. Thanks for listening. Oh, and remember, although I do love talking about Fallout Van Buren, you can check out all 700 pages of the leaked design documents for yourself by visiting the fan-run wikis. Links are in the description.